Gender, the social and the individual. Gender and society, what they didn't teach you in school, and it affects your identity. First of all, it's important to remember this is not a source of information, but a reflection essay, to invite us to think deeply about this topic. I'm aware that some things expressed here can be misinterpreted, but I can assure you I'm treating this topic with all the respect it deserves. Gender is a word that has caused much controversy in recent years. It has transcended the private sphere to become a social, legal, and economic topic. However, to understand it thoroughly, it's essential to simplify it, stripping away the conditioning, imaginary concepts, and prejudices that traditionally accompany it. Before addressing the concept of gender in its minimal expression, it's helpful to clarify the term sex, which frequently complicates its understanding. Sex is defined as the organic condition, masculine or feminine, of animals and plants. In this context, feminine refers to the entity that gestates the individual, while masculine corresponds to who contributes genetic material externally. On the other hand, gender is understood as the social concept that defines the roles, behaviors, activities, and attributes that a society considers appropriate for men and women. That is, it's a cultural construction, not inherent to biology. This definition refers to men and women, not to masculine and feminine. In fact, we usually use masculine and feminine as adjectives, while man and woman are nouns. To avoid confusion, here we'll define man as subject with masculine organs and woman as subject with feminine organs. The traditional definition points to roles, behaviors, and activities, but, in my opinion, it tries to encompass too much without going deep. Let's simplify. Let's consider role as social function, behavior as way of acting, and activities as what one is expected to do. Under these terms, all genders imply limitations for the individual and, at a social level, are impractical. For example, if a woman's role is to cook, this would imply that no man should cook, regardless of his ability, capacity, or need. Under such logic, if women don't cook, men would die of hunger. This view is problematic because it confronts us with an abstract concept, a rigid figure that only admits certain predefined forms. However, gender is also experienced from the individual perspective. From the individual's perspective, gender could be understood as the roles, behaviors, and activities that the person accepts as natural for themselves. In this case, it's like forming a puzzle piece according to one's own shape, which may or may not fit into the socially defined mold. If we adopt this notion of individual gender, the sum of these genders shapes the social gender, not the other way around. It's possible that the social definition of gender has its origin in biological factors. For example, women, by gestating and nurturing offspring, assumed certain roles. Men, on the other hand, sought resources to survive. Although this may have been true at its origin, it hardly describes the current reality of gender. Society has evolved, we are no longer hunter-gatherers, and in recent centuries, the concept of the individual as a member of the collective has strengthened. In strictly practical terms, society itself doesn't care if a woman or a man cooks, it's interested in someone doing it. It doesn't matter if we're emotional or stoic, but that we're able to face social difficulties adequately. Perhaps, in an unexpected turn, we could conclude that gender is not so important for society, although it may be for the individual. Social gender is part of conditioning and the collective imaginary, ideas that don't necessarily adjust to reality. Individually, gender encompasses functions, commitments, behaviors, and actions aligned with our true self. Acting according to our own gender allows us to grow as individuals and contribute integrally to society. However, nothing is that simple. The value of gender. Understanding reality without rules or guides is difficult. Humans tend to judge and label to understand their environment, from poison ivy, bad, to watermelon, good. Similarly, social gender functions like training wheels on a bicycle, they might not be necessary, but they give confidence while we learn to move in social life. Masculine and feminine have become labels to which we assign different characteristics, mainly adjectives: soft feminine, hard masculine, strong masculine, weak feminine, and so on. These associations often become arbitrary, to the degree of producing dissonance between gender and sex. A strong woman or a sensitive man sounds contradictory, although in reality, it's perfectly natural. Ultimately, gender can be reduced to a collection of adjectives that we arbitrarily assign to people, objects, or attitudes. This habit of labeling is so ingrained that it's difficult for us to think of a skirt without automatically associating it with the feminine, although objectively it's just a piece of sewn cloth. Gender is not real. Gender exists, but it's not real in an objective sense. It's part of a set of imaginary and arbitrary ideas about how our roles, activities, behaviors, and the adjectives we use daily should be. However, although gender as a concept may be a mental construction, the difficulties, emotions, and perceptions it generates are deeply real. At an individual level, each person chooses the adjectives and characteristics that allow them to be their true self, beyond any social label. For example, someone can be strong, gentle, determined, and emotional, regardless of whether others consider these qualities masculine or feminine. At other levels, gender becomes more complex. At the legal level, laws recognize men and women as subjects with different rights and obligations, explicitly established by legislation. One of the most controversial debates in this area is the right to legally change one's sex to live according to self-perceived identity. However, if there were truly full freedom of gender expression, perhaps this legal change would be much less relevant. I don't dare to generalize, as a sex change often involves many more factors than just gender perception. In the public sphere, especially in the preservation of decency, the delicate topic of bathroom separation arises. Bathrooms are places where we are forced to expose our genitals, so their division is based on two main arguments: the preservation of privacy and the prevention of inappropriate sexual acts. However, both arguments have limitations. Sexual acts can occur in any bathroom and between people of any gender. There is no solid argument that prevents, with an appropriate privacy design, people of different genders from sharing the same space. Regarding security, it's often argued that gender diversity increases the risk of theft or identity theft. For example, someone could carry identification that doesn't correspond to their physical appearance. However, current security mechanisms, such as biometrics and advanced verification systems, have improved so much that it would even be difficult to impersonate someone of the same sex or similar appearance. Identity theft is a risk inherent to any person, independent of gender. In statistical, computational, and commercial fields, gender has traditionally served as a useful dimension to identify patterns and make decisions. Adding or removing values in that dimension can complicate data analysis, but this only requires a period of adaptation and learning to normalize new categories. In the health area, it's fundamental to distinguish between sex and gender. It doesn't matter if a woman identifies and lives as a man, their biology means they must visit the gynecologist, as there are still physiological differences between male and female bodies. This last point leads us to a topic that, although it intersects with gender, is itself something completely different. The reality of transsexualism. Among people who experience dissonance between their biological sex and the gender with which they identify, there is a group that wants to live as members of the other sex and is willing to modify their body through surgical and hormonal treatments. It's crucial to distinguish this phenomenon, as this is not solely about behaviors or values, not even about sexuality. Although gender dysphoria is often discussed, personally, I believe that the more precise term would be sex dysmorphia, as gender, as we've analyzed, consists more of ideas and behaviors that any person can adopt. Those who opt for transition seek to adjust their physical body to the identity with which they feel aligned. The reasons for taking this decision can and should be much deeper than issues related to social gender. The most important thing is to recognize that this type of decision involves assuming important legal, social, and health responsibilities. It's not a step that should be taken lightly or in adolescence, a stage where the criteria to consider the risks, implications, and responsibilities it entails have not yet been fully formed. Therefore, a high level of maturity is necessary before making an irreversible decision, and it's most advisable to do so once adulthood has been reached. Doubts. If gender is an imaginary construction, why does it affect so much how we feel, act, or even our self-esteem and mental health? Gender is an idea that is often associated with conditioning and imaginary ideas. This causes us to make value judgments about duty and makes us feel shame, fury, indignation, etc., which are very real emotions. What is not real are the ideas that provoke them. Aren't there advantages or at least practical reasons for gender roles? There were in the past, and we're talking about very much in the past, when humanity was just beginning. Currently, limiting a role to a gender is more an imposed disadvantage that makes life difficult for us. Could it be that they simplify certain things or help order, for example, in upbringing, work, relationships, etc.? That is true, simplifying helps us understand and have a starting point, and that is good. However, once we master the basics, we have to explore the complexity of issues to understand their reality. Not stay with the simplified explanation. Does my life improve or worsen if I stop following to the letter what I should be according to my gender? That depends on each person and their value and importance systems. What's important is that you take advantage of what works from your gender, and change what doesn't. Can society adapt to each person choosing without rigid labels? Society can adapt, but it will be a long process, which might take 4, 5, or more generations to be completely accepted. However, I don't think you want to wait that long to be yourself. How can I distinguish if my interests or behaviors come from my true self or just from my conditioning and social imaginary? That can take time. The key is to practice solitude, question where certain ideas come from, and contrast them with reality. In the end, you'll discover that living is not swimming against the current, but sailing with the wind at your back. Does only the mind matter, or should biological sex also influence my identity? Biological sex often influences through hormone production, in the matter of gender, mainly estrogen and testosterone, but in the end, the mind transforms the body. To what extent is it okay to leave total freedom, and to what extent is a certain common framework needed to avoid falling into social disorder? This question goes far beyond the gender topic, but a phrase I could use to mark the line is: one is first, but not above others. We have the right to live, grow, strengthen ourselves, and learn. But so do those around us. When our own actions prevent the development of others, that's when we should consider changing and establishing limits. What is the practical benefit of questioning gender and roles? Isn't it just another fad? The main benefit of questioning gender and roles is to establish a link with reality, with what they really are, imply, and mean for us and the people around us. It gives us the opportunity to have confidence in life, and establish meaningful relationships with our environment. Yes, perhaps genders are just another fad, one that has lasted for more than 20,000 years. By understanding. What real difference does it make between gender dysphoria and sex dysmorphia? Gender dysphoria is the scientific term for the discomfort a person feels when perceiving themselves as a member of another sex. However, the term gender refers rather to a series of ideas and thoughts, not necessarily associated with sex. That's why it's proposed to change the term to sex dysphoria. However, that suggestion is not official, just a suggestion from the author. Why would someone change their sex if gender is just an idea? Each case is particular, and they have their reasons for doing it. It should be clarified that these reasons are neither unilateral nor taken lightly. They are normally accompanied by medical diagnoses and extensive psychological tests that indicate that sex reassignment is a viable and favorable treatment for these individuals. When the gender we choose contrasts greatly with what society expects from us, it's natural that there exists resistance and even disapproval. Significant transitions take time, and the best strategy to generate positive change is by demonstrating that this is harmless and even practical. Avoid starting conflicts and demonstrate that your true self is your best self. Remember, the power is yours.